Hello and welcome to Sunday Politics. There are more public sector strikes coming up this week. We'll ask what the unions hope to achieve and what's required to bring the industrial action to an end. There's a crisis at the very heart of Northern Ireland with dire warnings that Lough Neagh is dying. We'll ask what needs to happen to put things right and how quickly it can be implemented. And joining me to offer his expert opinion on all of that and more, our former political editor, Mark Davenport. Later this week, health workers across Northern Ireland will be taking to the picket lines as unions call on the Secretary of State to use his powers to restore pay parity for workers here. Meanwhile, the Irish Congress of Trades Unions has said the UK government should write off Stormont's budget overspend. I'm joined by the ICTU Assistant General Secretary Gerry Murphy and Karen Murray, who's the Northern Ireland Director of the Royal College of Midwives. Welcome to both of you and thanks very much indeed for joining us today. Karen Murray, first of all, what precisely are you taking this action for?
I think I need to start off by saying that this is not the position that members of the Royal College of Midwives want to be in. It's not in the DNA of midwives to take industrial action. When we took our ballot earlier in the year, it was based on the fact that the pay review body had recommended a 4% pay offer for last year and 3% for this year. Obviously, those pay deals have been settled in England, Scotland and Wales. But so far in Northern Ireland, we have had no further offers made to us to bring us back into pay parity with the rest of the UK, and my members are becoming much more frustrated about that.
If what was offered and accepted by your colleagues across the water was on the table here, would we not be looking at this industrial action?
I think if we think back to the 2019 dispute, pay parity was very hard won at that stage, with a number of health trade unions taking industrial action at that stage. And there was a ministerial commitment that we would retain pay parity. It seems very unfair that midwives and maternity support workers in Northern Ireland who are doing exactly the same job, the same function looking after women and babies, are earning up to £2,000 less than their colleagues in England and Wales. And that's very frustrating. And in terms of retention of midwives and MSWs, it causes a problem for us. It's a 40-minute flight between here and Edinburgh and Glasgow. Scottish midwives got a 6.5% pay rise for this year. So we really need to start thinking about those young midwives who are completing and graduating from Queen's at the moment and the decisions they're going to make about where they work. So retention and workforce is tied up in this.
Can I just ask you about the process as it currently stands, if there is a process at the moment? I mean, you've had talks with the Secretary of State on this issue. Has that come to an end? Has that process stalled? Are you hopeful that it could be kick-started again sooner rather than later? How would you describe the status of the process?
I think the process has not really progressed. We suspended or paused our action in April in good faith to engage in those talks with the Secretary of State. Unfortunately, 6 months later, we're still really no further forward. The initial discussions were obviously around a budget, a health budget, and also around Barnett consequentials in relation to the pay offer in England and Wales. But we have made no progress with those. That being said, I think we're always willing to talk to anybody in terms of actually being able to settle this, because, as I said at the very beginning, this is not where midwives and maternity support workers want to be.
Yeah. I suppose you could say, couldn't you, that if the Secretary of State's not keen to engage in a process of dialogue, he's extremely unlikely to acquiesce to your demands after industrial action. I mean, potentially this is making the situation worse rather than better.
I don't believe so. I think you get to a point where our members have to be able to express their frustration. I can do that in numerous meetings, but at some point our members feel the need to be able to do it themselves.
Yeah, but expressing their frustration has consequences for members of the public who require good midwifery services.
And I think we have to be clear that all health services, including maternity services at the moment, are under extreme pressure. And some of this protest and the claim for pay parity and a pay rise is around trying to ensure that those services are maintained and that we actually have an opportunity to improve services. We won't do that if we're losing midwives and maternity support workers to other jurisdictions for better salaries, because our workforce won't be here and we won't be able to provide the services anyway.
Let's bring in Jerry Murphy. Just on a general point, first of all, before we get into the specifics of what you're calling for the government to do, what do you make of the possibility, or well, it'd be very remarkable if the industrial action we're talking about doesn't happen, the probability of further disruption to maternity services later this week?
I think it's regrettable that our midwives have been forced into a position where they feel they have no option, only withdraw their labour, which of course is their right. What I believe we need to do here is to sit down and have a really serious conversation across the piece. I'm talking about the Secretary of State, the Northern Ireland office, the senior civil servants who are in charge of the day-to-day running of the place, and ourselves, the trade union movement, and plot a pathway forward. And to that end, Mark, we brought forward a paper during the week outlining what we believe provides an immediate relief, if you like, some medium-term proposals, and indeed some longer-term proposals.
And key to that is your call for the £300 million overspend to be written off by the government.
Indeed.
And what are the chances, seriously, of that happening?
Well, I don't know, Mark.
Slim, I would think.
The government wrote off £8.7 billion in February of 2002 of public monies which had been spent on inferior and non-existent PPE. This is small beer compared to that amount of money, so I don't see why it couldn't be written off. And indeed, if it was written off, it opens the way. It would transform, in the first instance, the industrial relations climate across the public services. Secondly, it would free up the Barnett consequentials, which may greatly assist in resolving the numerous disputes ongoing across the public service at the moment. So I don't think it's fantasy to be asking for that approximately 300 million to be written off.
What leverage, though, do you have to deliver on that? I mean, is there a process of dialogue between yourselves and the government? I mean, it seems that the NIO is in charge at the moment. If anybody's in charge of Northern Ireland, we don't have devolution. Is there a conversation happening about writing off that £300 million? And is there a conversation happening about what's happening in terms of industrial action, not just in the health service, but elsewhere, potentially in the months ahead?
There are no formal conversations taking place between the Irish Congress of Trade Unions and the NIO, or indeed the Secretary of State.
Is that because the NIO doesn't want to talk to you, or have you not formally approached the powers that be for that conversation?
We have formally approached the head of the Northern Ireland Civil Service, and indeed a meeting will take place in the coming days with Jane Brady.
Right.
Subsequent to that, we will be approaching the NIO. We previously have spoken to the NIO about these matters, but it was some time ago now. We believe that, or we wish to be going to any meeting with the NIO with something substantive to put on the table. We believe we have that. We have 4 very clear proposals here around the budget, which we think would make a fundamental difference to the way our public services are provided today and indeed into the future in a sustainable fashion.
What is your sense of what might lie ahead for members of the public, particularly people who need the services of our doctors and nurses? I mean, are we looking potentially at a winter of discontent? Because there are many outstanding issues, and it does seem that the government is not keen to move in the direction that you would like it to move. I think that's fair to say, isn't it?
Well, I think what's fair to say is that service level provisions across the entirety of the public service are not what we need or what our population requires. That's come about because of a decade of austerity, spending priorities which are at odds with the needs of our population. We have an ageing population here. We have a population which suffering from high levels of social deprivation. Those are structural problems. What we need are solutions here which address those structural problems in the longer term.
Okay, let me just bring in Karen Murray for a final thought. If you have your industrial action as planned later in the week and nothing changes as far as the government is concerned and no new offer is put on the table, what happens then?
I think we will continue in dispute. You know, we are open to having talks with anybody that speak to us. I think there is an absolute duty between the Westminster government and our elected representatives to move things forward and get us to a point where we have governance and a mechanism whereby we can actually engage and settle these disputes. And that includes a budgetary mechanism, that there will be available money for us to be able to have conversations around and negotiations around what midwives, maternity support workers and other healthcare professionals receive as a pay uplift.
Okay, well, we'll see what happens as the days and weeks unfold, and we'll keep a very close eye on things. From our point of view, thank you both very much indeed for coming in to join us today. Mark Devonport has been listening to that, and he's with me now. What did you make of that? I mean, it does seem we could be set on a collision course here, because the government doesn't seem to be keen to move, as I suggested during that interview.
Well, there is a sense of deja vu all over again, because we all remember that the nurses' strike previously did play a part in forcing the politicians back to sharing power at Stormont. I'm not quite sure that all the parts are in place that were in place at that time, but it's manifestly unfair that ordinary nurses, midwives, other health workers are being made to take responsibility for spending decisions made by previous Stormont administrations that they had nothing whatsoever to do with. That's the government's position at the moment. It's not signing off on that pay uplift that we've had in other parts of the UK because it wants to see Stormont clear its overspend. And the question will be, will this become then part of any kind of talks about restoring Stormont, any kind of financial package that will go alongside that? Or will things get so bad in the short term, if we have industrial action in terms of maternity services and other areas of the health service, that Chris Heaton-Harris will step in? He may be reluctant to, because it removes a card that he can play in relation to the local politicians. Yeah.
One of the other demands of the ICTU, of course, is to see changes to the operation, the setup, I suppose, of the Barnett formula. And that's the way in which the Barnett consequences and the way in which funding comes to Northern Ireland from the Treasury pot. And of course, that's very much in line with many of our local politicians who think that is absolutely necessary. But again, there doesn't seem to be any appetite for that on the part of the government.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly something that's been voiced by our local parties and that the DUP has thrown into the mix. We've heard from the likes of Gavin Robinson in relation to a need to review the Barnett formula. Breaking this down, it's jargon essentially for us getting our portion of public spending on the basis of the population, the percentage across the UK, and instead local politicians and others argue that we have greater needs and there should be a review. I think it's not impossible that the government will concede a review, but the problem is that if you go into any of these processes, the Treasury normally is the people who control the data and the information, and you rarely go into a negotiation with the Treasury and come out on top. So maybe we'll get a more generous formula in the future, but it could be a lengthy process.
But in the meantime, I mean, you hate to summon up a phrase like a winter of discontent, but when you hear what the representatives of the ICTU and the Royal College of Midwives are saying, when you hear the determination they have to see this issue resolved to the satisfaction of their members, which they think ultimately will be to the benefit of everybody in Northern Ireland, you can see that we do appear to be on something of a collision course. Yeah,
it's very difficult because at the moment, obviously, the permanent secretaries who are in charge of this, they have neither the resources nor really the leeway to pay the money that the health workers and that the other public sector workers say that they're owed. So we're kind of locked into something where it would appear that we are going to have some kind of industrial dispute. How difficult that's going to then be for those who need those maternity services, other health services and other public sector services, it's hard to say, but I don't think this is going to have a quick resolution.
Yeah, the difficulty, of course, is that the system is not the way it should really be in these circumstances. I mean, we're supposed to have a devolved administration here at the moment. We don't. We have an NIO, we have the ICTU meeting with the head of the civil service. There are many disparate elements to it, but there doesn't seem to be a joined up approach. And that has to be a contributing factor to the difficulties at the moment.
Yeah, well, it's one of the deficiencies of the kind of a la carte direct rule that we've got at the moment, where we've got Westminster politicians who move in just to pass a budget, but say that really they're hands off in relation to the sort of day-to-day activities going on at Stormont. And the problem there is that you get a kind of pass the parcel where they're saying, look, this isn't our role, but the civil servants, as I say, have neither the resources nor the actual sort of flexibility that local ministers would have to actually meet these demands.
OK, Mark, for now, thank you very much indeed. We'll talk to you again later in the programme. Now, Wake is to take place for Lough Neagh later today. It's being organised by a group of environmental activists, and people attending have been asked to wear black. It's just the latest sign that there are major problems in Lough Neagh. For weeks, we've seen pictures of toxic green-blue algae growing in the water. There have been concerns raised about the drinking water and about the fish being caught. Let's get the thoughts of the former Environment Minister Edwin Poots and the SDLP's MLA for Mid-Ulster, Patsy McLone. Welcome to both of you, and thanks very much indeed for joining us today. Edwin Poots, first of all, how alarmed are you at what's happening?
It's a very significant issue, and you know, Lough Neagh is such an important water body to us. It provides 40% of Northern Ireland's drinking water, and it is a hugely important body of water. So, of course, it's an issue of significant concern. And you know, we have scientists, and we need to have those scientists report back to us as to what needs to be done and what we can do to assist in the current circumstance. But it strikes me that this problem is one that we have identified. And
well, we can see pictures of it now. We're looking at pictures of this blue-green algae, which is so pervasive in Lough Neagh at the moment. When you were Environment Minister, when you were Agriculture Minister, I think you tried to get to the bottom of where this blue-green algae was coming from. I mean, did you?
They didn't at that time, but subsequent to that, AFBI have produced a report in June of this year. And that's a very important report. It goes into the issue about zebra mussels. And zebra mussels came into Lough Neagh in 2005. And by 2017, they really started to take off. Zebra mussels perform a cleaning function. So what AFBI would tell us now is that the oxygen in the water is okay, and that it's good enough for fish life and all of that to live in. But that the zebra mussels have cleaned so much of the material that would be at the top of the loch that the sunlight that is penetrating the loch is causing the blue-green algae. And that, I'm not sure how we overcome it, because these zebra mussels are an invasive species. They came from Russia, Ukraine. Back then, they come on the bottom of boats, and once you get in, you can't get rid of them. And therefore, this may be a recurring problem. I'm not sure whether there's a scientific solution to it.
Well, I hope people will be hoping that there is, because, as you say, 750,000 people get their drinking water from the loch, 40% of the population of Northern Ireland. Patsy McLone, you met the Northern Ireland Environment Agency last week. You are a local MLA, yeah. So this is a huge concern for your constituents, presumably. Did you hear anything in that conversation that gave you cause for optimism?
Not particularly, no. And first of all, I was reared within 500 yards of Lough Neagh. That's where I grew up, that's where I spent my childhood days, and it's passionate for me to sit here today and to think of what's happened to the loch. Now, Edwin has mentioned one lesser element of it, and that's the zebra mussels. What's happening to the loch is the mix of ingredients that are going into the loch. Yes, zebra mussels are causing an element of that, but we have the mix of phosphates, nitrates, the intensification of the temperature. Temperature has gone up significantly, and you have all this mix currently in the loch, and what's happening is the heat is causing this algae to rise, and we're getting the stinks and smells from it.
Have you ever seen the situation as bad as it is?
No, but I have to say now, having been reared alongside the loch, I've noticed in recent years the virtual absence of Lough Neagh flies, yeah, which feeds the fish. Now, and again, we're hearing from the scientists, from the people who know, that what's happening is the larvae are being devoured, consumed, and this is having a consequential effect on the fish stocks, because that's the food for the fish.
Edwin Poots, Patsy McClone raised a couple of issues there. Increasing temperatures through global warming, runoff from agricultural land, and of course sewage. The Green Party has recently expressed its concerns about large amounts of raw sewage being dumped into the loch, 200,000 tonnes, it quoted in a recent statement. You, of course, had ministerial responsibility for these issues. You were Environment Minister from 2009 to 2011, Agriculture and Environment then from 2020 to 2022. Did you do everything that you should have been doing to try to prevent this crisis from developing?
Well, there's actually less and considerably less runoffs from agriculture into the loch than would have been historically. So,
how do you know that's the case?
Well, first of all, Northern Ireland is a nitrate vulnerable zone, so there's no agricultural slurry spreading from the middle of October to the end of January, which is a period where you'll get the highest runoffs. Secondly, whenever I was Minister, we provided some support for farmers to buy equipment which directly injects slurries into the soil, and find that there's less runoff with that. And thirdly, we had commenced a piece of work on soil analysis, and that has taken place right across every field of Northern Ireland, so we know exactly how much phosphate is actually in the ground, and therefore farmers can respond to that and put on whatever fertilisers they actually need and not excess fertilisers.
Yeah. Well, what about the issue of sewage being dumped, though? 200,000 tonnes of raw sewage going into the loch. Why is that allowed to happen? Well,
that's a Green Party statement, and I'd put a warning caveat on that, in that who it comes from. But in respect of the sewage system, Lough Neagh obviously is a major source of our drinking water. The Northern Ireland Water is responsible for both sewage and the provision of fresh water, and this is all to be monitored. Therefore, it is the role and responsibility directly of Northern Ireland Water and the Chief Executive to ensure that on both fronts that they are treating sewage before it goes into the loch, and that the water that they take out of the loch is fit for human consumption. And at this point, it appears to be fit for human consumption, and indeed, there is no need to cause public alarm on that front.
Yes, and Northern Ireland Water has issued a statement. It says, key sentence, drinking water supplied from the water treatment works which use Lough Neagh as their raw water sources are designed with the potential for algae to be present, and robust treatment processes are in place to manage this effectively. Patsy McClone, are you satisfied that drinking water from Lough Neagh, drinking water that your constituents are consuming, is safe?
Well, just first of all, I would like to elaborate a wee bit on what Edwin has just said. The NIEA, that's DAERA's own scientists, have said that the composition of phosphates in the water, 62% unfortunately comes from agricultural sources, 24% comes from NI water, and the other 14% is from septic tanks. Now, that's their own scientists who are saying that. So clearly there's an issue or a problem that has to be addressed there, whether it's phosphates and nitrates that are contributing to this problem.
And that is agricultural runoff you're referring to?
Agricultural runoff, NI water runoff and septic tank runoff. They've presented that science to us themselves. That's NIEA.
Right.
So we clearly see and identify where at least a source of some of the problem is. Zebra mussels are certainly there. What you can do about that, I'm not too sure. Now, back to your original point about the water. I've had a number of complaints, a few complaints about smells from the water and various, this is from the drinking water, the public consumption. Now, in those instances, what I advise people to do is immediately get in touch with NI Water. And if you don't trust NI Water, some other independent body to analyse the water.
So those are anecdotal instances that you're talking about, but generally 750,000 people, 40% of the Northern Ireland population, get their drinking water from Lough Neagh. NI Water says, you know, they're sure that drinking water supplied meets strict quality standards. Are you satisfied that that is the case? Would you drink the water from Lough Neagh?
Well, I did this morning. I'm served where I am, where I live, is served from the Myola, from the River Myola water treatment plant. I had my tea this morning, I had a drink of water before I came out, and that's what I did do. That's what in actuality I did do. Now, I do think that NI Water does have to make sure that there's a lot of erosion of public confidence in many cases about the water supply and concerns about it, smells, tastes and that. So NI Water have to reassure the public about the quality of the water that's being consumed, definitely.
Right. Edwin Poots, just very briefly, because we're nearly out of time, can't let you go without asking you about reports suggesting your party leader, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, is considering ending his boycott of the Stormont institutions. Do you believe that's about to happen?
I think that we need to see something seismic coming from Downing Street, and it's going to take something significant to make that happen. I very much want it to happen. However, what has been on the table heretofore is nowhere near adequate to bring the DUP back into the room.
OK, all right, we need to leave it there. Thanks both very much indeed for joining us. Let's get some analysis of that now from Mark Devonport. Mark, just to go back to the discussion about Lough Neagh and the situation there as far as the health of the water is concerned, it is a major worry for a lot of people, and it's confusing.
Yeah, I mean, we have to be thankful that the water going to Patsy McGlone and other consumers is still drinkable at the moment. But certainly anybody who's watched the reports from our own colleagues in BBC Northern Ireland or Sky's David Blevins, the Belfast Telegraph, Sam McBride have been out on the water there. You have to be extraordinarily concerned that this stretch of water, which we don't see very much of because of the geography of Northern Ireland, the way it's hidden away, but it should appear to be sort of dying at the moment in the way that it is. The effect on wildlife, the effect on the fish resources there in Lough Neagh is truly shocking, and it certainly seems to be something that successive stormont departments haven't kind of got a hold on, and we now don't necessarily need to kind of be sitting around and discussing it. We definitely need action of whatever kind that is, and it may be that we need more of a clamp down on those agricultural emissions and other sort of effluent that's allowed into the loch, because what we're seeing is there's obviously several different elements to it, but it seems to be that climate change is making this worse because the greater temperatures are heating the thing up and contributing to the algal growth.
I would have thought there's little doubt that it's a subject we'll be returning to on this programme in the weeks and months ahead. I want to just end our chat today on the politics of this place, and particularly the DUP. You heard Edwin Poots there saying it would need to be something seismic from the government to allow the DUP to come back into the devolved institutions. Do you think something seismic is coming?
Well, I think we're going to have a busy couple of weeks in the run-up to the sort of party conferences. It looks like the government is going to kind of spell out a little bit more of the detail of what it's prepared to offer the DUP. For instance, on Tuesday in the House of Lords, I think the Northern Ireland Secretary is going to be giving evidence about the regulations that will apply to the so-called Green Lane, which will allow goods in with minimal checking from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. Whether it is seismic, though, I am still a little bit sceptical. I think we need to see not only some definite action in terms of the DUP's demands, but maybe something financial alongside that touches on the kind of issues that we were discussing with the trade unions.
Very, very briefly, Suzanne Breen from the Belfast Telegraph warned on Thursday night Sir Geoffrey Donaldson faces a split in the party if he tries to bring it back into the executive without getting full support. That's the reality.
Well, potentially, because those objections from one wing of the party still exist. We've heard them from the likes of Lord Dodds.
OK, need to leave it there. Thanks very much indeed for that, Mark. Just before we go, quick reminder about our latest Red Lines podcast. This week's episode features our exclusive interview with the former Chief Constable Sir George Hamilton on the leadership crisis in the PSNI. That's available on BBC Sounds or wherever you get your podcasts. Or you can watch the interview, just search for The View on the iPlayer. For now, though, from everyone in the team, thanks for watching. Have a good day from all of us. Bye-bye.